On a desolate mountain ridge, a covert operation sets in motion a chain of events far beyond its initial target, trapping an entire armored division and revealing a vulnerability no one anticipated. At 4:19, the first charge is carefully placed into the rock. There's no signal, no confirmation call. The demolition specialist, guided by touch, locates a diagonal crack in the limestone face, a fissure wide enough to engulf both forearms. He secures the buried payload while his partner holds the wire coil and scans the road below. 6 men, 4 devices, and a critical window of opportunity that will close the moment anyone inside Tunnel Sector 7 decides to move again. The date is March 12, 2026. The location, the Zagros mountain range, western Iran, at an elevation of 1,840 meters. Just 43 minutes prior, the rear-guard vehicle of Iran's 3rd Armored Division cleared the eastern portal, and the mountain's stone mouth seemed to close behind it. Not literally, of course, the reinforced entrance still stands open, diesel exhaust still curling from its lip into the pre-dawn cold. But the entire column is now inside, approximately 200 vehicles from the 3rd Armored and 16th Mechanized Brigade. Heavy armor, fuel carriers, and mobile artillery are staged underground, awaiting a planned dawn movement. The tunnel provides cover from aerial observation, but it also presents the Viper element with a singular, irreplaceable opportunity. The specialist secures the first charge and begins unspooling wire towards the ravine wall. Charges 2 and 3 are placed more quickly. The fracture lines here run almost parallel. Geological surveys conducted months earlier identified these as stress points, where the limestone spine has been quietly separating for decades, needing only the right trigger to complete its collapse. The specialist, however, isn't focused on geology. His mind is on wire length and the patrol schedule that the Kurdish guide memorized from 3 weeks of observation. At 4:31, the guide grabs his wrist. 2 vehicles emerge around the limestone shelf to the south. No headlights. They move at the unhurried pace of men who expect to find nothing. An Iranian border unit. The guide has seen this patrol before, same route, same timing, same indifference. What he has not seen before are 6 men pressed flat into a ravine with live charges wired into the rock face directly above a road where the patrol is about to stop. 1 vehicle halts directly below the western portal. A soldier steps out, tilting his head back to gaze at the ridgeline. He isn't searching, it's simply the idle look of someone enjoying a quiet moment in the cold air, with no pressing duties. Then he reaches into a jacket pocket and produces a cigarette. On the slope above the ravine, 3 Viper members have gone completely still. The relay wire stretches across the open ground between them, 40 meters of it catching the first gray edge of pre-dawn light. If the soldier's eyes track up the slope and to the left, the wire will end the operation before the charges do. He smokes, facing the road. The specialist resumes his work, pressing his hands flat against the rock to steady the tremor he refuses to acknowledge. Charge 4 is seated into the deepest fracture line, the one the surveys designated as the primary initiation point, where the fault runs deepest into the mountain structure. He nudges it flush, tamps it down, and begins the wire run back towards the relay point. The guide counts the seconds. Both men know the devices are live. The next 10 minutes will yield precisely 2 outcomes, quiet or not quiet. No middle option exists on this ridgeline. The cigarette drops. The soldier rolls his shoulders and gets back into the vehicle. The patrol moves around the next bend without slowing, without looking up, without finding anything on a mountain that has hidden much larger secrets than 6 men and 4 demolition packages. Nobody on the ridge moves for 90 seconds after the engine sound fades. Then the team leader checks his watch, 4:44. He points down the slope towards the relay position. The specialist begins the long wire run, 600 meters of it across loose shale, fed into cracks and pressed under rocks wherever the terrain allows, keeping the line tight to the ground as the sky begins to pale at the eastern edge. The mountain around him is silent, not peaceful, but patient. The relay wire runs taut across 600 meters of loose shale, and somewhere below, the mountain is about to be asked a question it cannot refuse. At 5:02, the team leader closes the circuit. The signal travels the wire in a fraction of a second. The first buried payload receives it, and the limestone spine, carrying the weight of a ridgeline that has stood undisturbed since before any army marched through this range, shivers. The shiver arrives before the sound. That gap, half a second between ground tremor and acoustic crack, is what separates a geological event from a simple explosion. The mountain answers in sequence, vibration first, traveling upward through boot soles, into knees, into teeth. Then a concussive crack that hits the eardrums like a flat palm. Then the long, grinding release of the western face, shearing away, not crumbling, not cracking, but a decisive granite cascade pouring across the slope in a single, continuous curtain. The carved opening below compresses as the load arrives, the reinforced mouth holding inward under a weight it was never designed to absorb. The debris wall builds in 4 seconds, then stops. Silence, long enough to breathe once. The second charge has not fired. The demolition specialist processes this without moving. A timing fault means the initiator failed, and the device is cold. A circuit break means the charge is still live and waiting for anything to restore continuity, including the weight of a boot on the wire. He has a narrow window to determine which situation he is in, because the debris field from the first collapse is still settling, and fracture propagation in this limestone does not pause for human decision-making. He moves back towards the ravine. The detonation catches him before he reaches it, close enough that the pressure wave arrives before the sound. Close enough that shattered shale peppers his jacket like thrown gravel. Close enough to knock him sideways onto the slope. He rolls, catches a boulder, and stays flat while the world below reorganizes itself. The eastern portal, the reinforced mouth that swallowed the armored column 8 hours ago, takes the second collapse differently from the first. Where the western face sheared in a curtain, the eastern section folds. The passage swallows itself in a sequence of lateral movements, granite riding granite, the carved opening disappearing behind a debris wall that continues accumulating as secondary material follows the primary cascade down the slope. From outside, it sounds like sustained thunder in a box. Inside Tunnel Sector 7, the column feels it before the sound reaches them. Concussion moves through the tunnel floor, through steel treads, up into seats and hull interiors. Then the pressure wave arrives from both directions simultaneously, inward from the eastern collapse, inward from the western compression, bouncing off concrete walls, attenuating, arriving as something between a physical blow and a prolonged rumble that has no clean end. External communications are absent, not jammed, simply gone. The signal path above no longer exists in recognizable form. The eastern exit is sealed. The western arch is bent but held, leaving a compressed opening of personnel width, not armor width. The steel column below now has a ceiling, a floor, and 8 kilometers of tunnel connecting 2 exits, one of which is a debris wall, and one of which is an arch under a load it was not engineered to carry. On the ridgeline, this is already secondary information. The Iranian signals helicopter crests the far ridge and banks towards the dust column. The column is enormous, visible from every direction, a gray-white pillar rising 200 meters into the pre-dawn air, impossible to misidentify as anything other than a major structural collapse. The aircraft is 3 ridges out. Its thermal system will resolve warm signatures against cold limestone in under 2 minutes. The team leader doesn't issue an order. There is one action available, and everyone already knows it. They move down the slope fast into the boulder field, using the rock cover the Kurdish guide mapped 3 weeks earlier precisely for this contingency. The route runs northeast, away from the dust column, dropping elevation quickly through terrain that is unstable and dark, exactly what Viper needs right now. The helicopter reaches the collapse site and begins orbiting the dust cloud. It is looking at the wrong ridgeline. 4 kilometers down the slope lies the extraction point. 4 kilometers of loose rock and failing darkness, moving fast. Behind them, the dust column rises 200 meters into the pre-dawn sky, a monument nobody planned, marking a tomb nobody can open. By full light, the eastern portal of Tunnel Sector 7 has ceased to exist as an operational feature. A debris wall of compacted granite, shattered concrete, and displaced shale runs approximately 25 meters deep at its thickest point and continues settling as secondary material finds its angle of repose. The western arch is standing, deformed, stress-fractured through the upper third of its span, bearing a redistributed load across geometry it was not designed to accommodate, but standing. The compressed opening it provides is 1.8 meters high and 3 meters wide. Personnel can pass, but no vehicle in the column can. The trapped iron below has entered its own arithmetic. Engines running burn fuel, which the column cannot resupply. Engines off preserve fuel but surrender the only heat source in a tunnel sitting at 4 degrees Celsius. Brigade commanders are counting hours, not options. At 4:47 Zulu, a U.S. Central Command spokesperson acknowledges reported geological activity in the Zagros Mountains and declines further comment. 40 kilometers north, the excavators are already moving. Iranian engineering units, specialist tunnel clearing teams with tracked boring equipment and steel shoring on flatbed carriers, began rolling south on Route 37 before the dust column finished rising. These formations take months to assemble. Their presence here, this fast, suggests the tunnel network was always considered a potential vulnerability, and the response protocol was pre-planned. An ISR asset overhead logs every vehicle, every fuel stop, every command vehicle pulling off the road to consult a map. The excavators are making 30 kilometers per hour on mountain roads. They are 6 hours from Sector 7. 6 hours is a long time in a sealed tunnel. It is also a very short time for everyone watching the excavators move south. Viper reached the extraction point at 6:44. The helicopter was already there, rotors turning, crew chief standing at the open door, counting heads as they came in. Nobody asked how the operation went. The dust column, visible through the starboard window as the aircraft climbed north, communicated everything before anyone formed a question. The team leader filed his initial report in 4 sentences during the flight out. The imagery analysts would handle the rest. What the imagery analysts cannot yet determine, and what nobody in the regional command structure is prepared to address at 7 o'clock, is the condition of Tunnel Sector 9. Sector 9 sits 11 kilometers northeast of Sector 7, connected by a fault line that the original geological survey flagged as a secondary stress zone, lower priority, not a target. A second mechanized element had staged there 48 hours prior, a lighter formation, wheeled vehicles, logistics heavy. No charges were placed near Sector 9. No team went near its ridgeline. The seismic event at Sector 7 registered as a significant local tremor, strong enough, propagating through connected limestone formations, to reach Sector 9 with energy well above background levels. Whether that energy found the fault line beneath Sector 9's western wall, and what it may have done there, is a question that satellite imagery taken at 7:30 cannot fully answer. The resolution shows the portal intact. It shows a normal thermal signature from vehicles inside. It shows no visible surface disturbance on the ridgeline above. Sector 9's entrance cameras, still transmitting on a hardened fiber loop, recorded a hairline crack forming in the western wall at 7:12, and then the feed went dark. Not because anyone cut it, but because the wall the camera was mounted on was no longer where it had been.